Welcome to the series, How to Write Financial Matters, Monday, 26 February 2025. Today, we bring to you debt and crisis management in the fast-changing world. And to bring all this into perspective is none other than the president and founder of Financial Literacy Program, a author, a financial consultant, and a professional with over 25 years in financial management and institutional governance. Our dear audience, I bring to you Dr. Charles Barugahare. Charles, you're welcome.
Thank you.
When we talk of debt management, debt and crisis management in the fast-changing world, in the last 5 years, the world have seen a lot from COVID-19, global economic lockdown, climate change, wars and conflicts, increase in population, and also advancement in technology. Could you please, to our audience, give us the perspective at this management in the fast-changing world?
Thank you, Robinson Ogwang. To you and listeners, wherever you are. This morning, it's an honor to be here, and it gives me encouragement to see that you are all there giving attention to this webinar session. Our focus of attention this morning is debt. Our focus of our attention is debt and crisis management. And here we are going to be paying attention to a number of things. But let's get started. Debt, like any other, is something that almost all of us deal with. Actually, statistics show that 9 out of 10 in one way or another deal with debt. Why is it so? You will find that you have not paid your maid for the last maybe 2 months. That's already debt. You will find you picked some items from the supermarket and you promise to pay later. That's already debt. You will find that you have money that you got from the bank which you have not finished for paying for your loan, for your car, for your house, for your various things that you require. You pass through a shop and pick a shirt, and you pay half, and you pay the balance later. So debt is something we live with. And that's why Henry Wheeler Shaw said that debt is like any other trap, which you can easily fall into, but it is very hard to get out of. To bring this into perspective, Pranay Kumar hinted that he had actually 11 multiple debts, several from banks, several from money lenders, several from friends and family. But I want to tell you this morning that it was possible for him over time, steadily and gradually, be debt. So our focus of attention will be what is debt and what are the drivers of debt this morning. The second area of attention will be what is debt crisis and how does debt crisis occur and how can we avoid it or how can we minimize it. And the third area of attention is actually why is debt becoming an issue in a fast-changing world? And finally, we look at strategies and actions we can undertake to actually the debt. So that's where our focus of attention will be. I hand over to you, the moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Charles, for that good illustration. So it looks like from your conversation, from your illustration, from your background, that debt is something that we live with, and that once you get into the trap, it's very difficult for you to get out. So combining this with the crisis that sets in, are there decisions that we can take or make that would initiate crisis?
Thank you so much. But before I go into into the crisis and whatever, I want to tell you that debt is just something you owe. The money you owe someone, the money you owe to a company, the money you owe finally the good or service from the one who had a good or service. And it rightly arises because you don't have sufficient funds at the time to cover all your expenses. And because of that, you finance the gap through external financing, which we call debt. External financing, money that is not with you, but that helps you access food or service. And that's what makes debt become very important. In one way or another, we all need a mechanism to finance our debt from external process. And therefore, we need to understand why does debt, why do we need actually to get into debt? It's because one, our expenses a number of times and exceed our income. Number two, our commitment exceed what we project to. And number three, our sometimes and actually that we need some additional resources to boost us, our big plans, our big dreams. And because of that, debt becomes paramount. But Tony Robbins emphasized that debt is something that is very good to use, but we must be extremely careful because debt can be dangerous. As I've already hinted, it's easier to get, but it's very, very, very hard to actually settle. Particularly if you have not planned and if you have not systematically worked on how to clear that situation. And therefore, because the mechanisms under which debt is now becoming accessible, it is becoming easier on your phone to call for a debt, call for a loan, and say, on my phone, MTN, please send me a loan of 200,000. Airtel, send me a loan. On your mobile money, we send it to you. Banks are making it easier for everyone to get access to a loan. Money lenders are making it easier. When you go turn on your radio, turn on your TV, they are telling you a friend loan. They are telling you is accessible loan. They are telling you convenient ways of paying. The question is, are you at what interest are you actually going to pay for that loan? If you have not factored all those aspects into the perspective of why you get loan, then it becomes very, very challenging. Easily, that's why the first one, taking participating in access quick things. We want quick things. solve the problem quickly, to train to get the solution, you can quickly cope. Then move it into another level, which is a debt crisis. A debt crisis basically means that debt has gone beyond the level of which you can easily start to pay. So it means that you have consistently borrowed, you have consistently started to fail to pay, you have consistently challenged with meeting your day-to-day obligation. It's happening to individuals, happening to companies, it's happening to governments, both locally here within our country, the region, and internationally. It's happening to small companies, happening to medium-sized companies. It's also happening to large-sized companies. The important thing is, how are you moving into dealing with that debt that is tending to be a crisis? That's where the bottom line lands. And because of that, therefore important to have a perspective of, why do I need this debt? Is it a must that I must have this debt? Number two, what are the alternatives that I can use to either avoid this debt or to get a much lower debt that I can afford? The first aspect is actually dealing with your desires. What are your desires? If your desires are very big, but your income is very small, then you will be having enough appetite to actually look for debt. And once you have enough appetite to look for debt, your desires are significant, then it becomes challenging for you to easily get out of debt. And our expenses have become a problem. And why have our expenses become a problem? Number one is that the social services that used to be relatively friendly are now very costly. And I will look at education. You used to go to a school near you, study and compete and join a good A-level school, university. But it is now very hard. Go from a very UPD school and compete to join for university. And therefore, every parent is struggling to look for some additional money to put his or her child into a much better school where the fees is higher, and therefore that person is forced to go into acquiring debt. And there are several others. I want to hand over to you.
Thank you very much. The conversation is warming up, and for those joining us for the first time, this is the 10th financial series, and Dr. Charles Barugahare is discussing debt and crisis management in the fast changing world. You are not only an observer, but you are a participant. Please feel free to share your comments, your feedback, questions, and also to participate in answering some of the questions under the question and answer sessions. You are most welcome, and our next webinar will also be the last Wednesday, where we shall look at Lent and Ramadan financial lessons, being a period of faith. Dr. Charles, you talked of a case where someone with multiple debts from different sources exposing him and becoming a threat and a risk to his business, decided to look at the brighter side of it, consolidating these debts over time and having a budget and a debt management plan. Is this something that is also applicable in our case, in our situation today, in this fast changing world? Is this an example of many years ago, or is also very current? What lessons can we draw from this very good example?
Okay, thank you so much, Robin, for your one. And I will share some of the lessons that he actually went through to get out of debt. These lessons are also applicable to many of us, and I've applied some of them. And I will focus my attention on the top three. And I will begin with number three. Number one is my most favorite. Number three is strategy. Mary emphasized that it's very critical that you have an idea of how you are going to deal with the situation at hand. Because at first, you are already in that situation. And therefore, you have to start thinking about how to get out of that situation. Strategy means plan, arrangement of the number one is time. Two, you categorize those that know incident. And number three, he actually said, whatever little effort I put on one date will make that date reduce. So like the quote of the day said, of today, the financial quote of today said, you don't have to see the entire staircase to be able to make the first step. You just need to start with the first step towards dealing with the debt. And one of the ways in terms of strategy is, can you identify the smaller debts that you can easily clear? If, say, the smaller debt is the one which requires you to pay 150,000 in 2 weeks or in 2 months, then put 10,000 every day, you will see that debt clear. So instead of now having 11, you have to start to see that you have now 10 debts. And that will inspire you to start also on the other debt. The other is to pay attention to the one with the high interest rate and say, this is big, it has the interest rate. There are several options you have. One of them, which he emphasizes, is sacrifice. And sacrifice means that if you are say, among the things I have, one of the options is to dispose this and to get which interest that can actually swallow all my property. So it's a choice, it's a hard choice. Some of us may have to go into, and therefore make sure that we get out of that big debt, stabilize, and then work again. Because the energy you use to create that way, you can again use that same energy to rebuild it. But you can easily lose the asset because the bank can take it, the money lender can take it, and that's something you can avoid if you lay a strategy towards dealing with debt. The second that Paul talks about is the story. He talks about the story in the sense that you must have something to trigger you actually say, I must stop. I must stop this because it is not leading me in the direction that can make my life better. Normally they say there is a path towards anything. Either you will be having a conversation with a friend and the friend will tell you, I had a day and such a I'm also tired of it. So what is the story that you disrupting your mind to say, I must put a stop to this. I must minimize actions towards this. I must deal with the dilemma of continuing to increase or enhance debts. So in this case, the command saying the story was, I am beginning for the money that I got, I am not from the debt. What if I make a decision today, as I make a decision to reverse this position? And the position was, the debt is making my life miserable and I cannot pay this debt. Therefore, it began by going to there are things we need to start changing from today. And some of the things were adjusting lifestyle. He adjusted by moving, one, disposing the car he had that was consuming part of the money, and that on which he had a big debt on, and he said, go. So we must also be able to look at tough decisions we must make, from the story. What is it that is triggering you to actually change that? And the number one is the mindset. You must have a mindset for slowly and steadily move in a direction that can change your perspective. And therefore, the mind must be positive, must be strategic, must be organized in a manner that you must deal with the debt that is at hand, that is at your disposal. So the mind is the number one driver. Change the perspective into where you want to head in terms of dealing with debt. And here I'm focusing largely on personal debt. There are different strategies for business debt. There are different strategies for commercial debts, but this is more to do with personal debt management. I thank you.
Thank you. In the audience, we have business owners, chief executive officers. We have those who are struggling individuals. Prior to this meeting, talks of trying to improve the cash flow, raise more resources, break even, invest, consolidate, and expand. But issues of debt and cost of debt remains high. Dr. Charles, in today's series, Debt and Crisis Management in the Fast-Changing World, are there signs for investors that you are getting into crisis level with your debt? How can an investor detect that, identify that, respond to that, manage that, or prioritize? Thank you.
Thank you. Moving into a crisis begins from the perspective of cash flow. Cash flow has been emphasized by many authors as the lifeblood of business, but I also want to add that it is the lifeblood of your personal organization. You may have profit when you don't have actual cash within you. Acquire goods and services and bring them into your business, but you have not actually paid for them. So you have a full stock in your business, but most of it is financed through credit you have People have delivered steel, people have delivered cement, and they are going to come for their money, but the items are not going, and therefore you have stock, and you don't have cash flow. So the number one indicator is what is the frequency with which your goods or services convert into cash. If they quickly convert into cash, then you can easily pay. But if they don't easily convert into cash, you go and buy a piece of land and you cannot easily sell it, that money gets locked and you can't easily pull it out. You go and buy a car for the business, but that car is not generating faster return for that business. And therefore that money gets locked, and therefore you have to find means and ways of financing day to day. That's what forces us to go for overdraft. That's what forces us to go for loans in banks. That's what forces us to go for short-term credits from friends and family. That's what forces us to go into all possible options, acquire debt. And because those options are pushing us into acquiring finances, then we end up even acquiring costly finances. And because they are costly finances, the chances of paying it back becomes high. Now, this brings me to the second aspect, the cost of debt. In Uganda and maybe most of the African countries, the cost of debt is very high. The interest rate of 18 or 20
is the interest rate. The third is actually our habits and discipline. You actually go for a loan to boost up your business, but you end up going and buying a piece of land. You end up going and building a house. You use part of the money to build the house. You end up using part of the money to change your wardrobe. You end up, and all of that tend to disrupt the mechanism for your ability to then settle that debt at the right time. I've seen it happen with a number of friends. I've seen it happen with a number of entrepreneurs. I've seen it happen with a number of colleagues where somebody writes a very good proposal. When the money comes, part of the money is actually used for other things other than the priority for which the loan was acquired. But also the loan is costly. There are charges before you get the loan. By the time you get it, if you had asked for 100 million, you end up getting either 90 or 85, but you are going to pay interest on 100 million. All those magnify the challenge of why debt is becoming a real issue, but also becoming and growing into crisis levels. More importantly, is that with that kind of scenario, then we are forced into more costly debt, because you can't go to where you had acquired the previous debt, which you have failed to pay, but you need cash to operate day to day. So you run to alternative options. And when you run to alternative options, they give you even a much higher interest rate. and that makes it worse. So you move from bad to worse and to worse because we are moving into a direction where you are playing around for survival. And that's where the challenge is. I thank you.
Thank you very much for those relevant practical examples. We are here to learn. We are here to compare notes. We are here to make decisions. We talked at the beginning debt and crisis management in the fast changing world. Looking at the crisis from different perspectives, it looks like there are also areas beyond an investor's point of view, like the COVID-19 economic lockdown, the climate change and other natural disasters, wars and conflicts, and now advancement in technology, cybersecurity, and innovations, all that. As a mentor and a financial advisor, a consultant, what are your takes on this?
Yeah,
in relation to today's topic?
Thank you so much. Indeed, as you have indicated, there are multiple aspects that actually challenge us personally, in business, but also in our organizations we operate in. You hinted of the COVID-19. COVID-19 resulted into closure of several businesses. Largely, one out of cash flows, some cash flows could not come in because of the pandemic. That was one. Number two is we have a serious issue around taxation. And taxation, particularly in our country, particularly in a region, is actually relatively high. But also we are taxing almost the same category of people. So you'll find the same person who is paying rental, the same person who is having a shop in town, is the same person who is paying VAT, is the same person who is paying all the other forms of taxes. And therefore, the exposure of that person to tax takes away a number of cash that would be available for business. And therefore, this brings into the aspect of tax planning as a core to running business, because anything that takes cash out of your business is an aspect that we must pay attention to. And normally, when the taxman comes and computes the tax that is entitled to, he wants that money at a go. Now, when that money is pulled out of the business is actually made to collapse. Because even part of the money you have been eating, you have been investing in something else, part of it was money for taxes. And therefore, if you do not put it aside for taxes, it therefore exposes you to actually a threat from the taxman. I therefore encourage everyone, and I want to say everyone, either get somebody, if you have a business, advise you around tax so that you are able to put systematically that money aside and pay in parts so that the tax exposure is minimized. I also know that there may be other taxes that you may not have anticipated, but once you have managed the bigger taxes, then the exposure is significantly reduced. The other aspect that is affecting day-to-day operations that many people have been asking me around the financial coaching sessions is the aspect of, do we have the right advisors within the country in terms of tax because some of them say we have got advisors, but even then we again remain exposed. Some of them say, do we have advisors on strategy, so that we are able then to deal with strategy for our business. Some of them raise concerns about very fast changing nature of laws. Previously, for instance, rental tax for companies was lower, but now rental tax for companies is higher because there was a change of law. And therefore, as business people, we must continue adjusting our mindset, but also getting up-to-date information so that we change and adjust with the fast-moving changes that are happening. We also need to now pay attention to technology. Now, it is very easy for somebody to come to your site, for somebody to come to your software, and actually know how much you have actually earned. And therefore, all that money will be subject to tax if you have actually not put proper records for your expenses, proper records for what is allowable and what is not allowable, and you are therefore able to defend it. If you cannot afford a full-time accountant, I encourage you to get an outsourced accountant who can come once a quarter, who can come once every 6 months for maybe an hour or two. You reorganize your accounts to make sure that your accounts are aligned to deal with a number of things that eventually end up leading you into debt. I know one person who has been forced to go into debt for tax purposes. I challenge all of us to make sure that we plan ahead. We cannot plan for everything, but we can minimize the impact of those shocks that come out of unanticipated scenarios.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gal, for that very important illustration, providing very relevant specific examples where appropriate. Debt, crisis management in the past 10 years. Your response emphasis is on planning from immediate, mid-term, to long term, and also accurate information and use of professionals to support like accountants and many more. How possible is it with the changing environment around business, for one, to get accurate information, use relevant data to manage it, to avoid crisis, and also to do with business as required by the changing world?
Thank you so much. It's a hard paper, but I will attempt. The information is largely out there, but the biggest challenge is the ability to sort, sieve, analyze that kind of information. I forget the name of the person that hinted and said that for him, he focuses on buying businesses. And that his framework is that he starts from identifying around 100 companies. He spends some time to read about their financial statements, to read about their records, and reduces them to about 30. He goes further to now go into those institutions and ask the information so that he can delve deeper and reduce them to about 5. You can see a process of moving from 100 companies to 30, then to 5. He says it's in those 5 that is ready to go and negotiate and engage and get further information to be able to buy that kind of business. to what extent do we do that for our loans before we get them? How do we compare with other banks? How do we compare with what we are going to do and see whether it is going to be viable through that kind of robust system that facilitates you to minimize error that is out of lack of information. I'm not saying with even that process, you are going to eliminate all possible mistakes. But what I can say is that that process significantly minimizes and reduces that information. When I'm talking to a number of business people, there are very few people around them that support them. You find somebody has a lawyer, he calls and says, I am thinking about doing this. What do you say? You find somebody saying, I am calling my financial consultant. I want to first hear what he says. I'm going to buy a piece of land. I'm going to ask another broker whom I have regularly used to see whether this land is viable. I'm going to consult and invite friends of mine, 2 or 3, to see whether this piece of land is actually viable. Some of us actually go and see a piece of land alone. You get excited, you go in and buy, and the next day you actually find that piece of land was actually not viable. So the same applies to debt. So I want us to pay a little more attention into the perspective of actually saying, is there a way I can actually avoid this debt? Is there a way I can minimize this debt? If I was looking at 10 million as debt, can I minimize it and get 2, still do what I can, and sort this slowly with the limited sources of income I have? Can I get an alternative? Can I get somebody to partner with me to do this business so that instead of getting 10, I look for 2, another one brings actually 8, and we become partners, we share the risk, and we move together. So we must be able to open up to information that is widely available, to networks that is widely available, colleagues that are willing to share their experiences. One time I wanted to go for a loan, and I consulted 2, 3 people. And one of them told me, the way I see what you are going to do and the returns you're actually going to get from what you are going to do, this may not be very viable. I would advise you to go slowly, see how it grows, see how it improves. And then once you have stabilized it, then you can get a loan, scale it. So first of all is proof that it works. You get a loan to start a business, you have never run a business, and then all of a sudden you pay rent, and after rent, the business is not able to pick up. And therefore you get into a bigger challenge. So that's what would be my take, that the information is there, but we must go in, look for it, search for it, take time, consult, engage. We should be able to get the right information.
Very, very, very interesting conversation, and that perspective brings us to a point where we need to start engaging with our audience. And Dr. Charles in the audience, we have board members from different sectors of the economy, health, education, manufacturing, finance, insurance. Some of them sit on different committees of the board. The mandate provides strategic direction and oversight. If you are to engage one of them on a one-on-one, on what signs they should look in an enterprise, especially monitoring crisis level.
Thank you so much. As you hinted, we are going to be getting into the audience, and I hope the lines will be open so that people can connect to us. But on what you have asked, I want to share what Dr. Sudhir Pararia said, that it is very, very important to pay attention to the animal called cash flow, because cash flow is what brings us into debt. Not because we don't have assets, but we don't have cash. You need stock in your business, but you have a building and you don't have stock. And therefore, you need the cash. And therefore, for me, the fundamental aspect is the ability to adjust your resources and balance them in a manner that you have an element that is more close to cash, that is cash, that is moderate cash, and that is hard, like a physical asset. And once you do that, then it becomes much easier to flex your cash requirements. Because I know people who have assets that are 95% of their net worth. You have land, you have a house, you have what? 95% of your total net worth is actually physical assets. When such a person gets a need for cash, the only option is a loan. The only option is to borrow. The only option is either to sell, and when you sell very fast, you are likely to lose. And therefore, the advice I can give is that we must have some adequate balance in terms of what is liquid, what is semi-liquid.
Without going into specifics, so that we can know that what we learn from here is equally applicable, and how we can transform this crisis into opportunities.
Thank you so much. One thing that is dealt actively with in coaching, in mentorship, is mind and attitude change. I can tell that you can significantly change from any situation you are in into a better situation if you change your mindset, if you change your belief system, if you start to see positivity and start working small into creating a change in whatever aspect you are dealing with. If you are dealing with debt and you have actually a big debt, then you must accept, number one, that there is a debt you have to deal with. Number two, accept that there are actions that you must start taking. Number three, you must actually start taking those actions. Work or thinking without any action, you will not make any difference. You will not make any impact in your life. By acknowledging that there is a problem, have the story should enable you turn around that thinking and then go into action to actually start doing something small. In a short time, you will start to see that the debt that was a mountain is becoming a hill. That the debt that was a hill is turning into the valley. And you will gradually get out of it. I strongly believe, because I've seen and I've witnessed that happening. People have lost all the money and started all over again. People have lost assets through money lenders, through banks, but have repositioned themselves again. They started all, avoid going into that crisis extreme level by taking action now. But more importantly, there are those that have not yet gone into debt. You can now go in cautiously, but aware that debt is something we cannot easily avoid, but we can only manage it better. I thank you.
Or any other person in any business sector will ask what is the best time to acquire debt in the past 10 years. Why?
Wow. Now, the first comment there straight away is, why do you need debt? If you are going to plant coffee and you need money to buy seedlings and you want to start buying seedlings with debt, I would think that is not the right decision. If you have planted coffee and you are at harvesting time and you need some manpower, because if you don't harvest it quickly, it will get spoiled, then you can acquire some soft loan, because you know from the harvest, you will be able to pay quickly in a short time, and you will sell that coffee and pay them. Then you can quickly get that coffee, that debt to harvest. If you have cows and one of your cows has fallen sick, and unfortunately you don't have any money, it's not wise to say, I'm not going into debt. Get a veterinary doctor, tell him I will pay you. Immediately I sell milk, or I sell one of my goats. You have to treat that cow. You can't wait to say, I don't have money. I'm not going to treat this goat, this cow. But if you are going to get a debt to buy a cow and start looking after it, and then generate return out of it, I would not think as a farmer that's appropriate time to get debt. The appropriate time is to fill a short-term gap, whereby you are almost near cash, but there is some little barrier in terms of financing that is actually stopping you from accessing that cash coming towards you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for our audience and those who have experience in digital network. This webinar is also recorded in the YouTube. You can get all the details from the first webinar to today's 10 outright financial matters. So, let's please go back. You talked of, and I like the way you have put different authors and well-established chief executive officers, a source of inspiration. How do one make the decision of balancing between assets so that the liquidity part of it is fine, the cash flow is okay, because it seems somebody can be asset rich, you're struggling on the other side. This is a difficult business decision. How can you help us navigate this?
Yeah, thank you so much. Like you indicate, it is a difficult decision because many of us are attached to our assets. You have a piece of land, you have a house, you have a building where you do your business from, and all of those account for 90% or 95% of your net worth. So the question is, how do you sacrifice any of those to have liquidity? Now, for me, I would look at it from various perspectives. The first is to recognize that that structure is not sustainable. You can choose to start from there and say, I'm not building any more physical assets. I am now building liquidity. Now, that means you are thinking about going into bonds. You are thinking about going into money markets. You are thinking about going into treasury bills and so forth. That's one approach. The second approach is I am not seeing any more money coming quickly that can help me build that over time. You have to go to the drawing board and say, of these, I like all of them, but which one can I sacrifice to create liquidity? What can I sacrifice to create liquidity? You can't have your cake and eat it at the same time. You can't say, I like all my assets, but I also like liquidity. But you don't have liquidity, and therefore it calls upon you to say, of all these, I have chosen either to say, I have 3 plots, I've sold 2, I'm remaining with 1. Or I'm selling all these 3 plots, I'm remaining with my house and the building where I rent from. And that creates liquidity, which you can invest in some of the options I've hinted about. But importantly, it's a personal decision, looking at the risk exposures that you are going to meet in terms of if you need medical, how will you quickly convert those assets to help you go for treatment? In terms of if you need to pay school fees that is significant, how quickly can you generate cash that can enable you to pay fees? If you are looking at growing your business and you want to add in stock, how quickly can you get cash that you can add in? Is it through getting a loan, or is it through actually disposing one that will give you stability and that can enable you at a future date to rebuy or purchase that asset again, and then getting a loan that can gradually actually take the whole thing that you actually situate. So that would be my perspective. It's a hard decision, but you must look at the appropriate balance and see how you finance that appropriate structure. In my coaching sessions, I have helped a number of people to redefine, to reshape that kind of perspective. And some of them have actually taken that advice and have come back to thank me because they have actually seen that it works. I thank you so much.
Dr. Charles, time is not on our side. Even the president has to leave the floor at some stage. And in your concluding remarks, in the panel, we have people who are trying to transition the business, first generation, family business, to the next generation. Given this topic, debt and crisis management is the fast changing business world. You have made reference to different authors and advantage. One of the authors, from 1994, and I want to read from you. Who introduced the 5-stage crisis management model. And the stages are signal detection, probing, prevention, damage containment, recovery, and life. I know you go through these sessions in your mentorship program. What can we learn from this? What can we take home from the 10th webinar what can we refer to from time to time? If there were 3 words you can pick to share with the audience, what are the 3 words?
Thank you so much. I started with the emphasis that debt is like any other trap, easy enough to fall into, but hard enough to get out of. That's one. Number 2 is I picked a lot of lessons from the scenario of Pranay Kumar. The 3 lessons, he provided several lessons, but the top 3 lessons were strategy. It is not easy to get out of some scenario unless you have a plan, you have an action that you are willing to take to get out of it. The second is there must be a drive, some story, some inner drive to shift your mindset towards changing that. And the third one, which for me is the most important, is the mind. The mind that, yes, I can do it. I have the belief, I have the faith, I have the hope, I have the desire, I have the interest, I have the capacity. Even where the capacity is not there, I have all the resource persons around me to inspire me to get to that can enable me gradually actually get out of this challenge. And I therefore believe that debt as a challenge is like any other challenge in society, and it's something that we can gradually and steadily deal with. I thank you so much.
Excellent, excellent, and congratulations to all the audience members in the panel and for keeping within the last 60 minutes. And you had your CPD. Our next webinar last Wednesday, and the topic has already been shared. I would look forward meeting you, and the conversation can continue on the WhatsApp forum, discussions, comments, questions. We are happy. Congratulations for being in this part of the 10, being part of the 10 webinar. God bless.
Thank you.